Well, I have an idea based a little bit on what tiny bit I know,
Uh-huh.
uh, um, which is that who's the guy at Rutgers who talks about cultures of chance versus cultures of control? Jackson Lears. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know his work?
No.
Uh, so Jackson Lears talks about um, the what happened when the Europeans came to North America and met Native Americans was a clash between a Protestant ethos of predictability and and control with certain Native American cultures that explicitly embraced and celebrated chance,
Mm-hmm.
and that like there were these weird meetings between the world of old Europe and old North America,
Mm-hmm.
which were basically, it's like that the Native Americans would play games where they would kind of gamble or wage, place wages against each other, and they would do this with the Europeans on stupendously bad odds,
Mm-hmm.
where they would have a lot to lose, and the Europeans were like, what, why would you do that? And it wasn't about the reward of the thing. The reward was in actually embracing chance.
It was a game
Yeah.
that was not. It wasn't about scoring
Yeah.
who came out. Yeah.
Yeah, and celebrating the engagement with a system that no one was in control of, right? That didn't have predestination, didn't have any of the structures that had kind of come with on the ships. And does that fit anywhere in the? I don't know.
No, it just strikes me. I mean, if you make this distinction between a culture of chance and a culture of control, the first thing that comes to mind is that each has to include the other, and that the Protestant mentality, is that it's haunted by the unknowability of what is foreclosed. So predestination is all about an experience of an absolute lack of control, and it's just the mechanisms of control are ways of trying to convince yourself that you do have access to this thing which is unknowable. I mean, that's like Max Weber's, his diagnosis of the spirit of capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That grows out of this, that anxiety about salvation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your salvation is decided. You're going either to heaven or to hell. It's completely foreclosed. All you can do, so you can't control it. So all you can do is develop these disciplines, in a way, these virtual controls, or a virtuality of control that goes to convince yourself that
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to turn out the way you
Right.
hope. So
Right.
I think that scenario you described then also suggests the possibility that of a sort of inverse of that from the Native American perspective. Presumably, it's not that the natives are dumb.
Right.
That they don't have they don't know what probability is.
Right.
It's
right.
they
Exactly.
know, but that's not what it's about. They
That's
just
right.
see the game from the other side.
That's
But
right. Yeah.
in a way, they might be like playing the same game, but in this other way.
Yeah. Well, they're playing the same rules with different victories.
Yeah. Or with a different
possible.
attention,
Yeah.
or a different
criteria. Let's
yeah.
say. Yeah. Yeah. there's this idea that a lot of the ethos that we're talking about here was built into, it was propagated in part through early American game culture, the game of life, which was a guy, Milton Bradley, who was actually taking a pedagogic tool that sort of Protestant printers had generated. That the idea is that there's the sort of the game of life, and the thing that's still true about the game of life as it is sold today is that there's no choices, right? There's like all you do is just move forward, and it's a wheel, right? Because dice were illegal, they were an instrument of the devil, right? It's a wheel that just propels you forward, and it sort of sorts however it sorts. Maybe you're happy, maybe you're not, maybe you're and that was actually sort of how these ideas sort of filtered through into children's culture. And one of the interesting things for me is that you have kids and everybody else sort of growing up with games that are sort of the explicit contradiction of that, right? Where they're all about choices, like to the point that they're stressful. And that's just sort of an interesting thing that's been unlocked in a way.
Well, I mean, historically, the children are given. I mean, toys are drawn from this, from the sort of the trash from the past, this detritus, right? It's like the junkyard, what's left over. But they're also given to play with what is outmoded,
right,
So Arthurian romance becomes children's literature, and I think it's interesting to think about that with regard to games that have to do with like magic, divination, or forms of prognostication. So this like allowing children to play with this kind of or like, because you said it's you use the expression sort, the sortes, that's like the medieval, or it goes back to antiquity, the sortes Virgilianae. You would, and then the Christians did it with a book. You just open a book at random, like you prognosticate, or you
bibliomancy.
Bibliomancy is the same thing. You open, so you open yourself to this, and it's not that you are. I mean, what's cool about the game is that it's, in a way, you're saying I don't have a choice.
Right.
I can't know the future, but I'm going to allow myself this thing by which I can move into it, which is something other than my own predictable.
Yeah. I mean, I never really thought about it before, but I guess you probably look for the sign in whatever the densest material available is, right? Right. It's like in order to find some signal, you need as much noise as possible.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess for a long time, probably books were the noisiest, densest noisy material you could get. There's an amazing. I found a forum online of bibliomancers. And there was this amazing debate about whether you could use a computer to generate the random numbers, and the consensus was no, that you needed to use dice or like something physical.
Okay.
Because and there was like a very specific dissection of like why JavaScript randomness isn't really random, right? Which is a very weird thing, right? Because of course that's true, sort of, but it's also that it's in the randomness is the truth, right? Like that it's the inability of a computer to actually engage chance at its highest, say, purest level, that has kept the computer out of bibliomancy thus far.
But isn't this kind of? It seems like there's this question of scaling, right? Like, where does the event happen? Does the event happen, like, the event that selects the passage or whatever? Where does it take place? Does it take place obviously it takes place on multiple scales, you know. But what is the significance? Where does it seems like there has to be, like in the old practice of opening the book, there's this interface between the book, which is sitting there and which can be opened at any place, and then there's this whole movement of the human body which goes to open it, and kind of
right.
you sort of feel for a passage. You try to project some sort of wish into this motion which you cannot understand as you're doing it. This kind of
there's a beautiful
moving like
thing.
a dice.
If you look at like the kind of like procedures for bibliomancy, which which are all the things that they're really exactly the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you look at the instructions on how to use the Rand book of random numbers, right? Like, do you know about this book?
No,
it's
no.
Beautiful. It's basically the most beautiful book that humans have ever produced. We can probably argue about that, but in my mind, it's the most beautiful book. And it was before we had at our at our fingertips the ability to just generate random numbers, and you needed to be able to do that to do all kinds of computation, like for ballistics and nuclear missiles and stuff. And so they actually produced, it's something like 1,000 pages of just random numbers, and they had their entire methodology for how to do that. And if you were a physicist or whoever, and you needed random numbers, you would open up the book and pick one.
So
Except that the human predilection for picking something that's in the upper right of the right-hand page is so great that they
de-randomized.
They wrote out instructions. They were like go through, and it's this ritual of like how to make yourself random, in the picking of it. So it's like even there, it's like everything's random except us, right? And so the Rand Corporation, even the fact that I don't know whether they discovered that or thought about it, but just the idea that they thought through that thing that, like, if it really is about feeling it in your body, then you're actually channeling something that is routinized, right?
Right. Well, it seems like to me it would be an interesting place in order to try to draw the distinction between the random and the spontaneous. The spontaneous, we think of the spontaneous as being random because it's not predictable. It's not foreseeable. It's sort of wenceless and witherless or whatever. But it does have this direction. It's not. Its cause is unclear, right? Or it's self-caused. That's what spontaneity means. But it still has this orientation, right? It's not. Whereas randomness always seems like more of this kind of horizontal concept. It's just this sort of pure sorting. It could be this, or it's arbitrariness. Whereas the spontaneous is not arbitrary,
right? But
it's uncaused,
right?
Okay, so in one classic formulation from the 12th century of agency is these three kinds of work. There's divine work, which is to create ex nihilo by fiat, right? Just let there be, and there is. Just an omnipotent, spontaneous creation of something that never was, and really does not need to be. It can be almost arbitrary in that sense. Then there's natural work, natural production, which is defined as bringing forth the latent, what is like seeds, hidden potencies. It's already there. God's created these powers, but nature does the work of bringing things forth. And then there's human work, which is just severing what is joined and joining what is severed, recombining. It can take here, grafting. You can create these interesting mutations and reconfigurations, but the powers are really ontologically not your own. So that was one understanding of medieval. There's this weird
question that there may be biologists who can answer it, but I a good answer yet, which is there are all these synthetic biologists and overall biologists who are approaching bio from a computational standpoint. They say DNA is information, and if you manipulate that, you can. And the thing is that it doesn't really work. I mean, it kind of works. It almost works. It frequently works, but it doesn't just work, right? Like this idea that you can just write, and then it is written. Biology doesn't work like that. Maybe it doesn't work like that yet. Maybe we just don't know how to write it yet. But right now, I haven't gotten like a clear, good explanation as to, well, if it's different, why is it different? What characterizes that? What could explain that difference, right? And I think that's the heart of this. Is that maybe there are different types of systems and non-systems, and maybe they don't. Maybe they cannot be imposed on one another. And I think actually even understanding alternative models by which things are writ into the world, other than a fundamentally something that is based on the premise of a binary flip, is sort of it's missing from the contemporary worldview, I would say. So,
yeah. Well, and what you're suggesting is it sounds like a necessity for being able to imagine multiple systems in place in one space, in one domain simultaneously. There's multiple systems that are doing each other's work, and you don't know. Right. And again, it's like, so what we experience as spontaneity may be understood in terms of those things, like just as our own bodies, our bodies are functioning and they're doing that's sort of running, and then there's like our energy and our imagination and everything is running, and then we have this sort of intellectual operation which is going on, and all these things and they're all doing the same work. I mean, I'm gesturing, I'm thinking, they're simultaneous, they're all in the same space, and yet, you can't, and sort of whatever I is something that can kind of, is almost co-present in all these levels, but I can also identify or fixate in one system more than the others. And I somehow the spontaneous, I guess, has to do with this, maybe what happens out of that kind of almost like a co-presence of systems.
Interesting things for me about the transition to working at MIT is it's the first time in my life that I actually have any time with like proper scientists, right? Not like engineers, not people who are interested in science, but scientists. And the interesting thing to me is that their worldviews always explicitly acknowledge this part that we don't know because they have to, right? So there's a guy.
They're focusing on it.
There's a guy at MIT who's just he's working on neurobiology and ways of imaging the brain, real time, in vivo. Like let's look at the transmission of all the electricity through the brain, and you know, it could happen in our lifetime, right? Like quite plausibly. There's a couple of hurdles to get through, and so I was talking to him, and I said, so like basically once we do that, like basically one of the biggest questions in the history of sentience, you know, is sort of, you know, you can just solve, you know, and he goes, you know, and this is what was so interesting is he goes, yeah, if it turns out the cognition has something to do with electrical transmission through neurons. and he's like, but it might not, you know, like those might just be the record of a whole bunch of other stuff that we don't even have a concept for, right? You know, like the analogy, you know, it's like, it would be like if there was a hard drive, you know, that was like loading Photoshop, and you put a stethoscope to the hard drive and you could hear it, you know, and you could tell that there was a very specific whirring that happened when Photoshop was loading. But you still don't understand shit about what somebody is actually doing, right? You know, and one of the things that's really interesting to me is that as I've gained greater access to the work of scientists, the more I understand what they understand in terms of these worldviews, and that really what they're poking at and the ways that they're poking are very different than the way engineers go at it, which is really to solve a problem, right? Like that, you know, they start with the idea that the problem is solvable, and then they set the problem. They do, right? And a good scientist doesn't really do that. They have a question, and they set out to see what the answer might be. I think there's all kinds of systems that corrupt that, which is that in order to get funding, you have to publish your results. So that means you have to have results, and you can't publish unsuccessful results. So it means that every experiment has to be successful, and so the whole thing's fucked. But the premise is really beautiful, actually, right? And I've come to really understand science in a very different way. That is really about kind of poking at the premise of being, and not just trying to, you know, cure cancer as if that's a trivial.
But so there's that philosophical experience that's always lurking within the experiment, you know.
But I think there they acknowledge it, right? Like
I think because it's. I mean, to me, it also brings to mind how. Okay, so we know that the scientist, the one who knows, who possesses scientia, has this. Who's in the presence of non-knowledge, right? Is, you know, knows through. But then it seems in terms of technology, it seems like one of the lessons from that would be to acknowledge the presence and the operativity of non-knowledge or forms of non-knowledge within technological spaces, within engineering, space of engineering, how the unknown is always like a presence. I mean, I think then, like aesthetically, you know, there's, you know, like Hollywood is good at producing, you know, suspense or something. What is suspense? It's triggered by these conditions, but for things to work, to go back to the issue, for things to work and to do what they're to perform properly, there also has to be this sort of operative non-knowledge or something. This is kind of the idea that I'm playing with. Well, what if, for example, like, because in terms of again, it brings up this kind of operativity of non-knowledge, or you know, what I'm like the presence of the unknown within the known. Like, so one view on that, like that medieval idea, is like, well, that's just, you know, that's just to believe in a first and final cause of all things, and it's also just a big question that nobody can really answer. And it's just some imponderable, you know, what keeps time going. But what if that, the sense of that is actually like too much in the world? Like what if it's like so much of what the world does, human and also, you know, other than human, is actually generated and built out of like this kind of presence of this unknown, which is, you know, what if spontaneity doesn't need a ground, but the ground is just this empty ground of like there not being any ground. So things are constantly somehow springing out of themselves, like on the basis of this, like the absence of this God, which has to be there in order for things. And then more generally, in terms of like philosophy of time, and there was a question about attitudes towards time. Like what if the questions that the philosophers are anxious about and everything are actually just like too much embedded in things themselves? Like what if they're actually organisms are actually like living questions in some sense. I think I think code seems to speak to the possibility of there being this sort of semiotic world, or right, like do you know anything about like biosemiotics and bioharmony? Yeah. And this sort of idea that there's this semiosis, I guess it's maybe related to Charles Sanders Peirce, right? This kind of I don't know, examples are like, proteins have like chirality and things like that. So there is this kind of, if there is this world where things are kind of talking to each other in these non-human ways, then don't those worlds also, aren't they also haunted by these by questions, but not necessarily articulated, dialectically, but this sort of presence of this.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that amazing example that Uexküll uses of the world from a tick's point of view, right? Where they're born blind and ascend to the highest possible space, go into a sleep state basically until they detect, I think it's butyric acid, and then
then the blood, and then
they drop, and either they hit something or they don't. But that period of sleep state could be up to 18 years.
It's amazing.
Right? And so like all the things upon which we build meaning, like seasons or daylight, or like a year, or like none of that has any meaning for this thing that in principle, exists on the same planet and whatever as we do, but obviously not. Right.
Yeah. So for us, we imagine it by subtracting all the things that we have.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that seems to be the real beauty of of the tick example. Right. It's not that, so it's triggered by, and that we can imagine the moment of falling like all too well. Like we do that sort of thing all the time. Like smell something and go for it.
Yeah.
But to me, what's amazing is that dormant state.
Yeah, that's right.
Like something's happening in that dormancy, which is like, it's a kind of intelligent blindness. That would be like the presence of a question. Like it's just sitting there asking the question or something, like this sort of black.
Yeah.
But that's technology. Like that is a technology. Like on some level, it's doing this thing which produces this beneficial result for itself. It's this work. But it's also taking place in like almost like in a realm that it's not here, or we can't imagine it as.
Anything that doesn't produce evidence the way that like neurons firing in the brain produces evidence, or it doesn't produce, let's say, quantifiable data. Let's say, it's not just that it's written out of history; it's also written out of the future.
Yeah.
Right. I would say that's the fundamental dilemma, right?
Well, it seems like play. You mentioned games, and it seems like play is grounded in this sort of non-knowledge. Like you play with things, you don't know what to do. You're a kid, you don't know what to do with this thing. You play with it, or it's lost its function, it's broken.
Yeah. Well, the thing. So
you do something else with it.
Yeah, I've been spending all this time with like really hardcore chess people. And I'm not, it's not my thing, but I've been spending time with. And the thing that's really, really interesting is that, it was like maybe in the late 90s that chess it's solved as a puzzle, right? Where, the best human player in the world.
As a computational.
Yeah, the best human player in the world, is dominated by a computer, and that's not going to change ever in human history. And so it's considered, so chess as a problem was considered solved, but the people who are playing it, they're not playing a puzzle that's solved. What they're actually playing is, what you're doing is you're playing somebody else's mind. And what you're really doing is engaging that tick sleep state essence, right?
Right,
Which is
right.
like there's all this evidence of these things, but it's like, and what I'm really trying to do, right, is actually access that, and in typically 2-player games or team-based games, that's their beauty, right? And
So it's like knowing what makes the other guy fall off the branch. Is that kind of the
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, in games, what you're in contact with is somebody else's model
Right.
of a discrete world, right? And I think that's their beauty. I think that's because it's too hard to get into somebody's head about the wide world, but you can just about do it, if you put enough constraints on it.